What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is The Full Measure and recently I've been putting out a series of videos of weapons which I currently like using in Destiny 2, more specifically in Season of the Plunder. The idea being that I wanted to bring PVE and PvP God roll versions of these weapons to you, which will probably be good even after this season finishes. Now, the last couple of weapons I've been looking at have all been either in the primary or the secondary slot, aka either energy or kinetic weapons. So I thought it was about time to look at a heavy weapon. More specifically, today we're going to look at the Palmyra B rocket launcher. Now, this has two things going for it, which I think are really good. First of all, it is a stasis rocket launcher, which there is not a lot of. And secondly, this rocket launcher fires tracking projectiles, which generally is my favorite kind of rocket launcher. This is also a weapon that you can discover the pattern for. And that means that you can eventually, once you have unlocked that pattern, craft the perfect version of this rocket launcher for you, whether you want to be using it in PvE content or PvP. Looking at the base stats of the weapon, it has fairly low blast radius, but there's going to be some ways in which we can really increase the impact of this rocket launcher with specific choices in mods. And generally speaking, we also are trying to get as much velocity onto this as we can. Since it fires tracking projectiles, the idea is to get that firing as fast as possible to get to its target as fast as possible so that we lessen the chance of actually missing anything. Starting us off on the PvP side of things with just a hot take straight off the rip is that I don't think you should be using rocket launchers in PvP in the first place. At least I don't enjoy using them. I definitely think linear fusion rifles and machine guns are probably a better choice. Even swords could be really good, but that's not to say that you can't find success in using this rocket launcher or a rocket launcher in PvP. So nonetheless, here is an idea of what we should be building specifically for that. Now, feeding into this whole idea of the fact that these small tracking rocket projectiles need to reach their target as fast as possible, we want to be putting our PvP setup in such a way that we allow for the least amount of time passing between us pulling off and the rocket exiting the tube and it actually hitting its target, which means less time for our potential targets to dodge. Now, starting off with that, with our barrel, we absolutely want to be using quick launch. Now, quick launch gives us some velocity and it gives us some handling, which means we can swap into our rockets faster, and it means that our rocket actually hits its target sooner. Then I do also like using high velocity rounds on here, again just feeding into the whole fact that we want the rocket to be flying as fast as possible. High velocity rounds gives us an increase to the velocity stat, and it actually gives us an increase to the reload stat as well. But generally speaking, that's not that important in PvP. It's very seldom that you have the opportunity to fire off 2 or 3 rockets in a row. Maybe you are lucky in that way, and then kudos to you, but often it's about that first time shot and that first time hit. Now, when we get to perks 1 and 2, specifically, again, you'll notice that the whole idea, as mentioned, is this whole velocity topic. So the perk the trait in trait tree 1 that suits us the best is absolutely impulse amplifier. Now, this increases your velocity by a whole boatload, and it actually gives us a boost to our reload speed as well. So in the chance of you actually having 2 or 3 rockets on board, maybe you picked up a couple of heavy blocks, then you are able to have follow-up shots that much quicker, just in case you actually miss your target, or maybe there's more than one target that they're shooting at. Nonetheless, impulse amplifier does help us a lot with velocity and gets our velocity stat almost completely full, which means that we're going as fast as possible with that rocket to hit our intended target. Now, pairing that with our second trait, there's not a lot of great options for PvP for this rocket launcher in the second trait, but certainly the one that possibly makes the most sense is Adrenaline Junkie. Adrenaline Junkie basically gives you better handling and more damage after you kill something with this rocket launcher or after a grenade final blow. So what you could potentially do, you can string a grenade kill into a rocket shot, or maybe 2 rocket shots, anything like that. But the bottom line is we don't have a lot of fantastic options here. Certainly you could experiment with something like Chill Clip. Chill Clip says that a direct hit with the top half of the magazine, but since there's only one bullet or one rocket in this magazine, that's basically all that counts. that this causes a detonation that slows nearby targets. So even if you somehow miss, the blast radius could potentially still hit a target, which will cause that target to slow down. And in PvP, generally being able to mess with the mobility of your enemies is pretty good, because even if you aren't able to kill that guy, you're gonna probably cause another one of your teammates to be able to have a favorable exchange with them. Now, when we get to the origin trait here, we have Hacker Breach Armaments, which says that you basically deal more damage against vehicles, turrets, barricades, and stasis crystals. This is not, again, very useful in PvP, and this is, I think you're starting to kind of like get the idea of why I say that rocket launchers are not necessarily perfectly suited for PvP, because we are able to actually benefit much more from other trait roles and other origin traits in different heavy weapons than we actually get from rocket launchers. Nonetheless, this is perfectly suited more for a PvE setup, but in this case, since we're looking at a PvP version of this, it doesn't really matter. Nonetheless, it's not like we can pick anything else, so we're taking Hacker Breach Armaments. Then when it comes to the masterwork, rocket launchers have a velocity masterwork that they can get, which is one that's unique to them, that you only find here, whereas usually you find obviously stability and handling and range and all of those masterworks on other weapons. Obviously, again, feeding into this whole idea of getting our shell to the enemy as fast as possible, we want to be taking a velocity masterwork here. And then last but not least, again, for the same reasons I said before, we don't really have a huge amount of great choices here in terms of weapon mods, since we are trying to build a PvP setup here. So Icarus Grip is the only one that really comes to mind, which actually just increases your airborne effectiveness a little bit. So if you were to shoot this from the sky, then while jumping, then you would be gaining a little bit of benefit there. But since you are shooting a tracking rocket in any case, that kind of takes care of most of the accuracy that you basically need from this weapon. Then getting to the PvE setup of this rocket launcher, and let's be honest, the actual real reason why you would be fielding this, we have a slightly different setup here, and essentially how we put it together. What we want to do here is we want to preserve some of the velocity here, again making sure that we are actually able to hit targets with the rockets that we shoot. But now we also want to dramatically increase the blast radius, aka the punching power, the damage of this launcher, since we start at about 30 out of 100, which is not that great. So the first thing we're going to take when it comes to the barrel is we're going to switch it up, and we're going to use a volatile launch barrel. What this does is it gives us an increase to blast radius, it gives us a little bit less velocity and a little bit less handling. But because we're getting such a relatively large increase to blast radius, it's fairly important that we do pick this up. Now, you could stick with the previous, quick launch, and that's absolutely fine, because again, this gives you faster swap into the rocket launcher and it gives you a higher velocity. But if we want to get close to that 100, or actually onto 100 out of 100 blast radius, we absolutely need to be picking up volatile launch. Then again, to just feed into the power of this weapon, we take black powder as our magazine. This gives us a small amount of blast radius, 5 additional blast radius, and it actually takes a little bit of our stability away. Once again, these things like stability and handling, while they are super important on other weapons, on launchers themselves, they are not the primary stats which you are generally looking for. Yes, it is important to be able to swap to a weapon with relative speed, and yes, it is important to be able to follow up with a second shot and not be afflicted too much by something like stability. But due to the fact that rocket launchers are shoot, reload, shoot, these things don't really matter. Then when we get to trait 1 and trait 2, and this is literally where we're going to dramatically increase the power of this launcher, our first perk that we're going to take in trait 1 is going to be auto loading holster. Now, because we have one rocket in the tube at a time before we have to reload, the idea here would simply be that you can work your rockets into your boss damage rotation, or as you move through. So in other words, you're shooting with your other 2 weapons when a chunky target presents itself, or when you have your sights lined up on the boss, you swap to the launcher, you shoot it out, you swap back to your primary or secondary weapon, and you carry on mobbing and killing enemies and moving your way through the map. That means that once again, if you wait a little bit of time, then you're gonna be ready to again put some damage onto the boss, or again shoot at a chunky target. And when you swap to your rocket launcher, you're gonna have a rocket waiting for you in the tube. Now, the enhanced perk, or the enhanced version rather, of auto loading holster, which you can obviously put onto this weapon since it is a craftable weapon, makes auto loading holster even better because the time in which it takes to reload the rocket in is severely shortened, making it incredible to do this. So if you choose to only enhance one of these two traits, if you can only enhance one trait, absolutely think of getting auto loading holster first, because it will really increase the time, or rather decrease the time that it takes for this rocket to load back in for you to be able to use the rocket launcher. Now, our second trait here is where we're going to get the extra boom from, and that is lasting impression. Now, lasting impression works a little bit different here and changes essentially how this rocket launcher works. Now, we all play a lot of games, so we know how rocket launchers work by design. You shoot, something comes out and flies in the general direction of your barrel that it was aimed in. It hits the ground, the enemy or something like that, explodes and blows everything up. Now, lasting impression changes this, because what it does is it shoots a projectile that embeds itself into the target that it hits, and then after a few seconds explodes, causing damage. Now, the benefit that you get from lasting impression is that you get a massive payload of damage instead of that initial explosion. You do cause a small amount of damage when the rocket actually hits its target, but then when it embeds in the enemy, you can actually see it on the enemy with a little light glowing, and then after a little while it explodes and causes a huge amount of damage. Now, lasting impression dramatically increases how much this damage is that the rocket causes. So we go all the way from 40 out of 100 to 100 out of 100, which is the highest blast radius profile that we can have on this rocket launcher. Now, that's not your only option, and if you want to preserve the identity of a standard old school rocket launcher that you shoot and it explodes on impact, your secondary choice can be something like explosive light. Now, this trait requires a little bit of how can I say, triggering to actually get it to work perfectly. Explosive light means that your next projectile, after picking up a orb of power, deals increased damage and has a bigger blast radius. So if you are willing to play around that, and if you have, for instance, a setup in your armor that produces a huge amount of orbs of power, or you're bargaining on the fact that your allies, people that you run activities with, are producing a lot of orbs of power, then you can play around that and always be sure that before you start shooting with your rocket launcher, you pick up an orb of power, and then you will see a dramatic increase in damage as well. Bear in mind that if you don't do this, explosive light gives you no advantage at all, and so you absolutely need to be doing this. Sometimes you can really pull off some funny stuff where you can shoot a boss, the rocket embeds on a boss, the boss runs towards a bunch of his ads or things that he spawned, and when it explodes, it doesn't actually kill the boss, but it pretty much wipes out everything around the boss, because those were all lesser enemies. That is a fantastic way that can work out. Moving on to the origin trait itself here, again, we don't have any other choice. We have to take Hacker Breach armaments, but coincidentally, this origin perk actually suits PvE activity very well. This increases your damage against vehicles, turrets, barricades, and stasis crystals. You deal like 15% more damage, which is really good. That makes this particular rocket launcher really good in dealing with encounters where you are fighting like a tank, a land tank or something like that, or a bunch of turrets, or something. Then again, with our masterwork here, the same reason why we took velocity in the PvP setup is because that is an area that we want to kind of preserve some of the speed of this launcher. And since we are losing some velocity due to the fact that we're picking up volatile launch, we actually want to be putting some velocity back in, and the masterwork is one of the best ways of doing that. Then for our mod, our weapon mod, absolutely, this is your boss damaging weapon, so you want to be taking boss spec here. This is the weapon that you use when you want to be dealing a whole bunch of damage to the main enemy at the end of a strike or a nightfall or in a raid or anything like that, and this is definitely the right mod to take for that. As per usual, you can see both setups, the PvP as well as the PvE, for an easy screenshot if you want to come back to this later, so that you don't have to load up the video the entire time. And that's going to be it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments down below if you enjoy using this rocket launcher. I definitely think the meta right now is obviously linear fusion rifles and machine guns to a degree, but it's always good to have a good rocket launcher in the back there ready to be used when you need it, and especially due to the fact that this rocket launcher is that much better against things like vehicles and turrets and all of that, definitely means that it deserves a position in your arsenal. Let me know in the comments down below also other weapons that you'd like me to have a look at, and also tell me the different ways in which you set your Palmyra B up. But other than that, it is just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me.